Welcome in, and thanks for joining us here, the Ryen Russillo Show live, broadcasting on YouTube from Ringer, Spotify, and as we are joined almost every Monday throughout the football season, it's Todd McShay, and we have history, the first ever 12-team playoff bracket in college football. The teams, the bracket announced yesterday, and there's a few things that I want to get into. We're going to go through the bracket and kind of sift through this. Obviously, there's always drama when it's college football. A little bit later, I actually want to look at what the other systems would have given us and see if people like that better. But I think the headline for me, Todd, and we were lucky enough to kind of recap all the conference championship games on Saturday. Enjoyed joining you and Mensch on the McShay Show. But my headline is that I'm not really mad about anything. Maybe it was in preparation for what this would look like, but the selection of the teams, as far as the 12 teams that are in, there's nothing where I'm like outraged about any of this.
Okay. All right. I wouldn't say outraged, but I think mistakes were made. Okay. I think mistakes were made, and it wasn't from the second to last to the final college football playoff rankings. It was prior to that. And that's the problem I have with the committee. The committee put too much emphasis from the beginning on wins and losses and not enough emphasis on strength of schedule, strength of record. And I say that because they put themselves in a bind. That bind was after we did a reaction show, not off of the last rankings yesterday, but the week before, because I said all along, that's the most important rankings show that we have, because that's going to reveal what the committee is saying. And then obviously the committee chair comes out and says, if you're not playing in a college football championship game, a conference championship game, there's not going to be movement in the clusters below, right? So, and it's not going to affect necessarily whether you get in or get out. And they stayed true to that. And so because they put more emphasis on wins and losses and de-emphasized the strength of schedule and strength of record, they wound up in a bind because with SMU, ultimately. SMU, it should never have been a situation where SMU was sitting there in the top 12. If you look at the strength of schedule, strength of record, look at South Carolina, look at Alabama, look at Ole Miss. Strength of schedule for South Carolina is 13. Strength of record was 9. Alabama's strength of schedule was 18. 3 wins over top 25 teams. Ole Miss's strength of schedule was 14. Compare that to Indiana. Their strength of schedule was 67. 0 wins over top 25 teams. SMU, 57 strengths of schedule, compared to 13, 18, and 14 for those SEC teams. So when we got to the situation at the very end, in the last rankings, given all the information that they had provided, they had to put SMU in because they would have then devalued the conference championships. And what would have happened was, like, next year, it would have been a disaster. Teams would have opted out of playing in their conference championships. So the short-term loss for the committee and for college football is Alabama's not in. In my opinion, it should be South Carolina, but it really came down, given the rankings, to Alabama versus SMU. And so they'll lose money on that. Can you imagine the matchup, Penn State versus Alabama, versus the money they stand to gain and the attention and the excitement for Penn State versus SMU? There's a massive difference. But
sure, but that shouldn't be the reason.
No, I understand that. But in the long run, this is a business, though. And in the long run, if they took SMU out and put in one of the SEC schools, they're sending the message moving forward: don't play in your conference championships. And that's a much bigger disaster. So my issue all along has been the committee and how they valued the wins and losses versus the strength of schedule.
Yeah, they did a bad job where they really prioritized this much as standings, but that was something I was used to throughout the entire year. Like, you started to see it happen in the way they had treated Indiana. But all right, there's a lot there. The conference championship part of it, like, do I think SMU is better than those teams? No.
But stop there. But aren't we supposed to have the 12 best teams?
Yeah, but then that becomes
with the caveat of conference championships, which I do like, and we'll get to the seeding part of that, which is a disaster. I believe will be changed next year. But aren't we trying to reward conference champions plus reward the other 7 teams that are the best 7 teams in college football?
Yeah, but I mean, look, here's the problem is every year you're comparing different groups, okay? And I understand like they pinned themselves in this spot where they had said we're not going to penalize teams for losing in their conference championship games, which by the way, like I think at its core, that's a good thing. Like you should like when as I was looking through it, I'm going, it really sucks if these teams play in their conference championship game, lose, and then they get bounced out of it. So I understand what he's saying. But each year there could be different scenarios. Actually, there will be different scenarios. And by the way, like the whole idea now that the committee has married themselves to this, it's a different committee every year. So new people are going to see things differently just because they're replacing the people that came up with this in the past. So I kind of like having this rule, but you can't have any like hard and fast rules with this because the pool of teams that you're arguing about every year simply changes. In the past, we have defaulted to, and we'll use Alabama as that example because it works here again. When people would sit around and be like, "Do you really think there's four teams better than Alabama?" Usually the answer is always no. And so when they got in, I had no issue with it. I argued against it in the TCU year, the year where Ohio State had the two losses and Fox was selling you on this idea that Bama was irrelevant as a team being added in. I was on ESPN going like, this is a joke. I didn't even, that was the year Ohio State had the Iowa loss. So there's a lot of times that kind of Bama, like, do you think anybody's, I'm okay with thinking there's 12 teams better than Alabama this year. I was over it, completely over it after the Oklahoma game, after I started kind of propping them back up a little bit. I'm more aligned with you with South Carolina and Ole Miss, but it's kind of that one loss versus zero loss thing where I think it's wrong to just assume the zero loss team is always better than the one loss. But when that team got to two losses, it was harder for me to justify it. And in this case, we're talking about one loss versus three. And SMU, if they'd gotten blasted with the committee had just gone, you know what, they got destroyed by Clemson and we're going to put in that other SEC team. Maybe, but I don't really like, I'm not sitting here really mad about it, even if I think you're right, because we've talked about it enough this season. Clearly, they did not want to put that much time into let's really look at who these teams have played inside of their conference. Like, and there's a good example of this. Like, if it's about wins and losses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't Indiana higher? Because they know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
Because they know.
within a range though. They were never going to drop Indiana beyond kind of where they are but the one loss kept them in a range.
I guess I kind of like if you go through the rankings though, you're like, all right, you guys are keeping Indiana in there because they're 11-1. Totally get it. And after the SEC had that disastrous Saturday night where Ole Miss, A&M, and Bama all lose, like a scenario we thought 7 hours prior, like how does Indiana get into this with their only big game being a blowout at the shoe? Well, they're back. They were back in by the end of the night, but they weren't going to put them ahead of these other one-loss teams because they kind of know. So like Indiana is like a really interesting team in that I think they know the deal, but they're not going to penalize them that much. They're not actually going to apply some of the stuff to them that you clearly would like to have. Like, would you have been okay having a 3-loss SEC team in over Indiana?
Yeah, I
Or is
would
it
have.
the SMU thing? You would have.
It's more the SMU thing, but I actually would have. I would have been like, I applaud the committee because we're trying to get the best 12 teams in here. And Indiana didn't beat a top 25 team. Their strength of schedule is 67. 67 compared to 13, 18, 14 for South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, respectively. And Alabama's got 3 wins over top 25 teams. South Carolina beat 2 top 25 teams in the last 3 weeks of the regular season. One of which on the road against a rival South Carolina, Clemson, that now is in the championship, and it was so good that SMU only losing, in overtime or right before overtime with a 56-yard field goal, whatever it was. Clemson's so good that SMU still deserves to be in. South Carolina is the biggest travesty of all. Hottest team in the country down the stretch. Knocking off top 25 teams, win at Clemson in a rivalry game. And most importantly, I don't know if we have the graphic here. We did this on our show last week. part of the committee's decision is basing it off of who's playing in games. And it's put in there very clearly. If there's a significant player with injury, that is to be factored in. Well, I've got news for you. South Carolina was up 17-0 on LSU when Lenora Sellers, who was like out of this world down the stretch this season, 17-0 when Lenora Sellers got injured. And they wound up losing that game with two terrible calls that cost them in that game. And so if we're going to factor that in with Florida State a year ago, why aren't we factoring that in? Now, all of a sudden, South Carolina, in the committee's mind, could be a 2-loss team. And now
look, I'm with you on the South Carolina thing. The head-to-head with Ole Miss is going to cause a whole nother string of arguments there. I just don't understand why Bama is being argued in this spot. Like I'd rather have South Carolina in there than Indiana. I think I'd rather have SMU in there than Indiana. But we knew Indiana was going to be in there because of what happened that Saturday with all those other teams losing. The Florida State thing triggered me a little bit because I lived through Florida State Twitter doing a show every day at ESPN like 10 years ago. All right. So anybody that's ever faced that, and when Jimbo just poured kerosene all over the anger on top of everything else by basically saying that the SEC and ESPN were complicit. And I remember asking about it, and he was just like, good to know. And he just shut me down. It was actually brilliant by Jimbo. He got me. I do want to tell Florida State fans, though, the difference between, say, like Carson Beck getting hurt in the Georgia game or the Little Norris thing is that 12 is 3 times as many as 4. It's pretty simple math. So last year when there were 4 teams that get invited to the playoff, and I don't like what happened to Florida State last year, but I understood it. I didn't like it, but I understood it. Same. This year, it's a little different. It's a little different because there's 12 effing teams.
I agree.
Right? And whoever fires off that Florida State joke thinking that it's relevant, it's so stupid. And yet people keep doing it, thinking it's like somehow this got you insightful thing when you have these 12 teams. All right. Maybe I'm numb to the outrage part of it because I was preparing myself for this and because I was warning everybody before we even had this system in place that some of these things were going to happen. Now, the 4 automatic bids and the buys, I have to imagine that everybody was so mad after the BCS of multiple conferences being left out and the group of 5 essentially having no chance other than Cincinnati, that there had to be like a more inclusive agreement to finally get this thing done. And with that, you have the group of 5 scenario with Boise, right?
Yep.
And you see the brackets in front of you and you immediately think, wow, now that it's like the visual part of it, and almost sometimes it's decided you have to have mistakes play out. Even if you could see that they would happen, you have to actually have a case study for it to be the force behind change. Some of these paths, I think this is what has people more upset than whether or not South Carolina, Bama, or Indiana, SMU are seated in this thing.
Yeah, man, it's a problem.
So,
and we were bitching about it in October. Like, wait a second. So this team's going to play that team, and this team has a bye?
Yeah, now that you see it, like when you actually dial up the physical bracket in front of you.
It's scary.
All right, so let's go through the scenarios. Let's just start with the 1 and 2 pass. So Oregon goes undefeated, wins a great Big Ten championship game, and they're waiting on the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State. And
pause. And I get it because it's 8 and 9 and on paper, but when you push back, when you elevate Boise State to 3 and Arizona State to 4, you're obviously pushing down, so really it's the 6th best team and the 7th best team. So you got to play the winner of 6 versus 7 as the 1 seed if Oregon. To me, give me Texas's path where I get to play Clemson at home and then Arizona State to get to the semifinal. Or weirdly enough, like, please give me Penn State's path. I got to beat SMU, who just lost to Clemson, and Boise State to get to the semifinal. Like, the 5 and 6 seeds are the places to be in this thing. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, they kept SMU. It's important to point that out. They kept them at the 11 overall seed here, and Clemson's at the 12. I would rather play SMU. And Penn State's going to play SMU and then Boise. and then they're on the Georgia side of things, depending on what you think of Oregon and Georgia. But if you're looking at what potential scenarios there are for Oregon, you're thinking, okay, so I have to play the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State, and then likely if Texas gets through Clemson and Arizona State. I mean, making a lot of assumptions here. That seems to be far more daunting than what Georgia would be facing, where it's the winner of Indiana, Notre Dame, and then the winner of Boise State versus the winner of SMU, Penn State. So this is the part of it where, like, you just have to figure this out next year and go, you know what? We can't have a group of 5 be a 5 seed. We or a 3 seed, excuse me, a 4, one of the 4 with one of the buys. Is there anything to be said though of like, are we being a little dismissive of actually having to play the extra game? Like, would you actually rather be Texas than Oregon?
It depends on the team, quite honestly, and you can't factor that into like for Georgia. They desperately need, and it's not just Carson Beck, but they desperately need a bye, if you will. I think they started the season with Clemson. They played the toughest SEC. I think they played the toughest schedule of any team in this thing, still standing. Okay.
At Texas, at Bama, at Ole Miss.
Yeah. Like, what are we
and
talking
Texas
about?
again.
And started the season with Clemson. So, like, there's carnage physically, mentally. Like, what you heard Kirby Smart. He's berating his own, conference commissioner. It's Sankey, like, up in the, he should be celebrating, like, we won the SEC, and he's like, what have you done to us? And so for Georgia, they need it. But even, like, I remember Nick Saban talking about it, and it just takes you inside the mindset of a coach. And I can remember, like, even playing in college, like, there's something to staying on routine, right? And it's not a warm-up game. Like, we're probably going to see an upset here. I don't know if it's going to be Indiana over Notre Dame or SMU over Penn State or Clemson over Texas, Tennessee, Ohio State. But we're probably going to see an upset. So it's not an automatic that you win, in that first round if you're the higher seed. But I think for Georgia, it's much more important and valuable to have a week off. Whereas, I don't know that Texas hasn't played the toughest schedule. I think Texas would almost rather get a home game, keep, stay in rhythm, and not be sitting around for 2 weeks waiting, but they also then would have Arizona State in the next week. So it's just, it depends, but truly the biggest problem, and I do think it'll be rectified. I think it's going to take it. It took us looking at this situation now and saying, wait, Arizona State and Boise State are just sitting around waiting, and if they win one game, they're in the semis. It took us in this situation, see it one time through for, I strongly believe next year at the same time, we'll be talking about it's all based off of the rankings, create the seedings.
Would you have been happier if it were just Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Penn State with buys and then seeded out with the automatic bids?
Yes. I think everyone would be. Are you not? Would you not be?
I just think you have to reward the best teams. My whole thing when this was first talked about with the expansion was, we sit here and freak out about, like, oh, are they on the bubble as like the 69, 70th best basketball team? And it's just like some of these horrible arguments. Granted, we're not quite there yet with 60 football teams, but I just knew that the arguments at the back end were like, I've been very, very simple about this from the beginning. I mean, going all the way back to, I think, the BCS and then the expanded to 4, is that the chance to play for a national championship should be a massive reward. It should be just like, you shouldn't be able to back your way in to being invited to this thing. And it's certainly different now, but it meant every year you were going to be inviting in a couple teams, maybe 2 or 3 teams. You're like, I don't know that I'm that impressed with what that team did. And yet they're still alive to win a national championship. And people always come back to me and say, well, it's the same thing with the NFL. I apply the same thing. I wish there were less teams that made the playoffs in the NFL. I wish there were less teams that made the playoffs in the NBA and in hockey. I don't think these teams that go through all of these games, it's like, I don't even think you're that good. Cool. Now you're a 6th seed in your conference. And with football, it's just so delicate because of the turnover. And then you end up having this team, like, how did they pull that off? And that's maybe why people love the sport so much, because even the gap between teams, just something goes wrong. And next thing you know, 3 hours later, you have this great football game that's closing out at the end. So I've just had this fundamental opposition to all of it. Now that I have to accept it, it's going to be here and I'm going to enjoy all the extra games. The fact that like December 20th, we're going to have like a Friday night game, like it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to be into it because I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan. Right. But I think there feels like some really nasty, like commuter lane into a semifinal for a couple teams where after 3 months, 3+ months, Todd, I'm like, I don't think
Commuter
you're
lane.
that
I like
good.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
The HOV.
what the way it's set up now is. I look at it and go, that team is like a couple turnover game away from being in the Final Four for a national championship. And I know, the AD from Bama caught a bunch of heat because he was like, we're going to look at scheduling. And again, he got community noted immediately. And it's like, all of your losses were in conference. It's like, okay, once again, everyone, you missed the point. The point is that if I'm an AD, and I remember Kuiper with you years ago, Kuiper had this rant years ago, and he was right. It's like, what's the point of scheduling anybody out of conference? You hope you get that easy path. You start stockpiling all the wins. The next thing you know, you're competing for a national championship. I just think it's wrong. I think it's wrong, and I'm always going to have a problem with it, even if my headline of once these were released is that I'm conditioned to now being over it because I knew it was all going to happen.
I think we're facing, I don't know, I don't want to say 2 years, 5 years, whatever. I think we're facing, and everyone I talk to that's in the know, whether it's in television, executives who are part of a lot of important conversations, coaches who are involved in this also. Everyone seems to believe that we're kind of not, it's not in the distant future of massive change, whether it's 4 divisions, conferences, whatever you want to call them, where it's, because right now the problem is these conferences have become so big that you're winding up not playing a lot of good
Right.
teams. And like the Penn State schedule versus like I guess Penn State, Indiana's schedule is a lot different than some other team schedule. And even in the SEC, like Texas's schedule compared to Alabama's schedule and Georgia's schedule, different animals. And so I'm not here to explain all the different theories and all the different suggestions that have been made, but I do think that we're heading towards, in the next several years, a massive change to try to let's get it more regional. Let's try to equal things out, and let's create more of a balanced playing field during the regular season, so to avoid a lot of this nonsense.
Okay, I want to just, for the exercise part of this, look at the previous systems and ask, like, okay, would you have liked this? So if it were the BCS, well, hell, if it was the 40s, we would just, everything would be over and we'd have like 6 different national champions. If we had in the BCS, it would be Oregon, Georgia. Would you be okay with that? Would you rather that today than this?
No. I can't unsee. Like, okay, so what I 2 things I can't unsee when I look at this, right? I'm staring at this, the seedings and the games. I can't unsee Arizona State at 4 with a bye and Boise State at 3 with a bye. I can't unsee that. And that frustrates me. But what I also can't unsee in a real positive manner is, holy shit, we got Tennessee, Ohio State in 2 weeks. We got Clemson, Texas in 2 weeks. We got in-state Indiana, Notre Dame, and kind of a weird game. And like, I think Cignetti's going to cause some problems for Indiana, and to a lesser extent, SMU, Penn State. And then like 9 days later, New Year's, right? New Year's Eve and New Year's, we've got Georgia facing off of the winner of Notre Dame. It could be Georgia, Notre Dame. It could be Boise State, Penn
No, wait,
State.
were you saying you think Cignetti potentially causes some problems for Notre Dame, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could
Yeah.
see it being a frustrating game. I could. I'm just
I
saying,
think a
like,
lot of us wanted to see the Indiana SEC matchup there.
yeah, but
really,
still,
really wanted to see it. I think
well,
Notre Dame's like a good draw for them, to be honest with you. But
I do too. And so, but my point is, and knowing like 9, 10 days later, we've got 4 more games: Oregon
yeah,
versus Ohio State or Tennessee. Awesome. Arizona State versus Texas. Interesting. Penn State versus Boise State. Very interesting. Potentially Notre Dame versus Georgia. Awesome. And then we're not even done. Then we get the semifinals. Then we're
sure.
back to like where we started last year in the previous regime. So like to get all of that football, and let's not forget too, with the transfer portal, NIL, NFL draft, those 3 factors, how few like big time players and how little emphasis the went into the bowl games the last year or two. You know what I mean? Like nobody really truly cared. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. The emphasis on it was just not there. I found myself being less excited than I ever was last year for bowl games. I was, and so all of the focus has shifted, and this is where we need to be. And maybe it's 14 games moving forward and beyond, but I can't unsee what we have, and what we have is wonderful. So all my bitching and moaning today is about like where the committee can improve moving forward. At the end of the day, Alabama lost 3 games. SEC lost. I mean, South Carolina lost 3 games. Ole Miss lost 3 games. They made themselves vulnerable. But I think we can improve with the committee and the emphasis. But I can't ever go back to just semifinals and finals, or certainly not just a BCS with just a national championship game. I can't do it.
I'd rather just Oregon, Georgia play for a national championship.
Why?
I'm not speaking to the entertainment value because you're right. I have no counter to that. But as far as if you just cut it right there and said, okay, make the argument,
You're
make the two
insane.
best,
Like
make the two
I
best
can't even have this.
arguments.
I can't even have this conversation with you.
Texas lost to Georgia twice. You're emphasizing Georgia's strength of schedule. You're rewarding Oregon for winning the conference, being 13-0. Texas doesn't have an argument. Penn State doesn't have an argument. They lost in the conference championship game. Notre Dame's got the loss to Northern Illinois. Ohio State has the 2 losses. Like this would actually, in a BCS system, you'd go, those are the 2 right teams. No argument.
Okay, fine. But the only reason you would want that old system is because you felt like this regular season was devalued, where it wasn't even like that important to watch or fun to watch. Did you feel like
It
that
was
this season?
fun.
Because I
No,
didn't.
not at all. No, because
So what's
the
wrong with
argument.
you?
Well, I think we've known each other 20 years, but
Yeah.
Ohio State, Michigan, in most years, everything is on the line. And even in that Ohio State Michigan game during the broadcast, they're like, everything is on the line. And I'm just the guy on the couch going, actually, everything is not on the line. Like Ohio State loses their second game and they're still in the playoff. And this isn't even about Ohio State necessarily.
Yeah, but a lot was on
look,
the line. And because now Ohio State has to play Tennessee just to get the opportunity to go play Oregon.
Yeah,
And their head coach may have lost his job.
And everyone else wins the argument against me because Georgia Tech mattered on a Friday night in a way that you wouldn't have thought it would have mattered. However, if they had still made the SEC title game, beat Texas a second time, I think the 1-2 in the BCS, like there wouldn't have been any argument against it. All right, let's go to the 4-team system. Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Penn State. Now, the funny thing is to your point in the beginning,
Georgia, Texas, Penn State. Okay.
If you look at the AP, they bumped Notre Dame up 3 in front of Texas, Penn State, and in line with what you were talking about with SMU, Clemson, which I think is just funny to remind the audience. SMU loses the SEC title game. Not only were they not going to bounce SMU out for, say, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Bama, or Miami, they didn't even move them behind Clemson in the playoff rankings because Clemson has 3 losses, which again, they played Georgia, they played South Carolina, SMU didn't. The committee did not care. I don't understand how there's a room of people talking college football. They can't filter through that stuff. They lose the head-to-head. They keep SMU 10 in their rankings, the 11 seed. Clemson was at 16. They kept they kept Texas and Penn State in front of Notre Dame because, like, to your point, they were not going to penalize anybody for losing any of those games. Although I think it's interesting. Well, Iowa State, they bumped them down 2 spots. All right, so Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Penn State. Does that make more
Oregon
sense?
would play Penn State.
Yep.
Georgia would
Georgia
play
plays Texas a third time.
a third time. I mean, yeah, it's fun. It's good. But like if those four teams are as good as we think, then Penn State beats SMU and they beat Boise State and they're right back in it. But now they got to earn it. Georgia beats Notre Dame and they're back in it. Oregon beats Tennessee or Ohio State and they're back in it. Texas beats Clemson at home and then Arizona State, which I think will happen, and they're back in it. So maybe that's what we wind up with when it's all said and done. But I know this. I've got 20 days of build up and 2 and 4 days of awesome football that I'm excited about.
All right. So how about this proposal? The 6 team where it's 4 automatic bids plus the 5th automatic bid to a group of 5 team, and then 1 at large, and the first 2 teams get the bye.
That's so Penn State's out. That's horrible. What are you doing?
Well, let's run it. I'm just trying to give the people the other options. They seem to really like a lot of options here. So Oregon's your Big Ten.
Yep.
Georgia's your SEC.
Yep.
All right. So we'll go Big 12.
Arizona State's Big 12.
Right. Arizona State. But they would have Boise.
Clemson. So what the? Stop.
No, we're doing it. We're doing
okay.
it.
All right.
Just game it
Oregon,
out.
Georgia, Arizona State.
Buys. Right.
Buys. Yes. Then Arizona.
Clemson.
Yeah. Clemson, Arizona State, Boise State are all in. And then Texas is in.
All right. And the rankings would be Boise would be a 3 seed. Arizona State's a 4, Clemson's your 5, and then your at-large is Texas.
It's your show, so I'm just going to play along.
So your first round games would be Boise against Texas, and then Arizona State against Clemson, and they face Oregon and Georgia. A lot of people like that system because it guaranteed everybody, and you have to factor it all in. I mean, unless the TV networks are saying we actually don't like. That's probably the worst out of all of them because then that opens up all sorts of other arguments. Yeah.
Right. Who's a lot of people? When you say a lot of people like that, who's a lot of people?
There was a real egalitarian approach to this. And I think it just speaks to your fan passion, not you specifically, but nobody wants to sign up for a system where you're potentially going to be screwed unless you were the conference commissioners who said yes to the 14 playoff. Like that's the craziest thing ever. They kept telling us for years they weren't going to expand from the BCS and the 2 teams, right? And you and I have sat in those conferences too many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, how often Bill Hancock would be like, we can't have more games because of exams.
Right. I mean,
remember that one?
And I'm doing this, like just banging my head against
right.
the table.
Like we can't have the kids travel because it's just gonna be too many games, guys, and the exams.
And he did, and steadfast on that.
Right. Because I remember Herb Street one year was messing with him in it because I was hosting it that year, sort of. There was a panel that I got up there for that didn't go very well.
Yep.
And
you were kind of the company black sheep at times. It was fun.
Yeah, that was a rough look when one of the directors comes over and starts holding your hand, giving you a hard time during the panel discussion that you're not doing a good job interviewing enough people.
Not even on television, just like a group of
people. just a group of 200 of your coworkers. You're like, you put 13 people on the panel, man. It's not my fault. All right, so Herb Street looks at him and goes, how come, 11 games was the most and then 12 was the most and then you couldn't do this, you couldn't. He's like, how come you keep doing that? He's like, Kirk, it's a good question. And he was always great at that. And then he'd just be like, look, we all know why this is happening. We all know why it's all expanding. But when they went from 2 to 4, it was because the reporting at the time was like, everybody involved, all the power players in college football were just sick of all of us being like, this 2-team thing is so stupid, the computer element of it. And then you had that other poll that was factored into all of this. I would sit next to Brad Edwards for all those years, and he understood all the math, and he'd be like, well, this will mean this. And if Oklahoma State gets this win on the road, then that means this team's computer rankings, and you just be like, no one understands this. Everybody's mad. Okay, let's expand it, but we don't want to expand it too much. And they went to 4, and as soon as they went to 4, everybody's mad. It's because they just knew. No one likes a system where they know there's a chance that they're going to be screwed, even if they don't deserve the chance. So now, no matter what you do, no matter who is constructing something like this in power, these gray areas of debate, there's never going to be a version of this where on Monday everybody's like, you know what? Great job, cool. No notes. It doesn't exist. But this is apparently, I would say, the most inviting, right? Because you have this
Yeah.
many teams. You have something where there shouldn't be any part of the country that can look at this feeling like they're left out. Like everyone is represented, whether they deserve it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's represented. Yes. Everyone's represented. I'll give you that. And I honestly, I don't have a problem with the structure of the conference champions. I don't have a problem with that. It's just it's the de-emphasis on strength of schedule, who you're playing, strength of record, and the overemphasis on wins and losses with the other 7 teams. And then obviously what we just talked about, the seeding at the end, which will get fixed. Let me ask you this question. I've seen multiple people talk about it. I'm always a proponent of it. And I recognize this is not about the NFL draft. And I recognize that Ohio State, maybe they're not maybe. I think their best 2 players aren't eligible for this year's draft, and Caleb Downs and Smith, the wide receiver. But don't you think a part of that committee there should be someone representing the talent, like how much talent these teams truly have? Like I talk about this all the time. NFL scouts are on the road 4 months, and they only typically have regions. There are other scouts for each team that typically have there's like a top 100 scout who's going out and evaluating the top 100. Nagy said it. Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl. I don't know if there are any more people that are not part of NFL organizations that a group that would be more have more insight into what the talent level is than the Senior Bowl, who's putting together their lists and I think they have 11 scouts on the road. They have draft meetings and put together. And I'm not trying to make this about the NFL draft, but I am trying to make this about best teams. And I look at Alabama with like 8 to 10 draftable prospects. I look at South Carolina with 6 to 8 draftable prospects. I look at Ole Miss with 9 to 10 draftable prospects. And I compare that and Ohio State with 15, Tennessee with 7 to 8, Oregon with 9 to 11, Clemson only 5, Texas got a whole bunch, Arizona State I've got 2, okay, Indiana I've got 5, and mostly and almost all day 3. CJ West, the defensive tackle, maybe, but I think all day 3. Georgia with 12 to 14, and you get down to SMU with 2. Boise State with 2 to 3. So like, I don't know. Wouldn't there be some value in that, in having that voice in the room? Not necessarily, you got a bunch of committee. What is it? 12 committee members? Is it? How many?
Yeah, and then I think a 13th that oversees it.
All right, so maybe we have 14, and one of them is someone who can provide perspective on truly what we're watching. Because it's hard. It's hard to watch.
Is this your push to be on the committee one day?
It's not me. Not even me. I don't even know that I would want to do it, to be quite honest. But if
who would be the best?
If I was
who would be the best of the people we've worked upon? If we were, called to serve.
Called to serve.
Because if Cannell were ever on the committee, I would stop watching college football that season.
Absolutely. The best would be a Jim Nagy type who's overseeing the process that is most closely representative of a college scouting department in the NFL.
You know what? It was a really good sell. And whenever we get into arguments, well, you and I don't get into the arguments, but when you hear it's like, oh, it's not that much better. It's not that much better. And it's like, in what world would you ever say the conference with the best players isn't the best version of football? But for this, I mean, there's plenty of teams, and you know this, there's plenty of teams that are loaded with NFL talent that just have a bad year, right? I mean, how many teams?
Florida State's a perfect example. Like Florida State came in with a whole bunch of prospects, and not many, if any, wound up playing to the level that was expected or hoped for. And
LSU's probably got 5 first-rounders from this team.
I'm just trying to think through it. Yeah, maybe eventually. Yeah.
Eventually. I'm not talking eligible for 25.
But they played their way out. Florida State played their way out. But when you've got 3 teams on the cusp, with South Carolina
Sure.
and with Alabama and with Ole Miss. I think I'm not saying that like that the decision should be made based off of that. I think that having that voice in the room would be helpful. And I don't want to take up too much time. It's just a thought. I wanted to throw it out there.
Well, Nagy posted that and I saw it. And
Yeah.
then immediately he just got destroyed by college football writers being like, oh, okay, well, we'll just make this all about the draft part of it. I understand. Like, I think whenever we debate, hey, this team or that team and these hypotheticals and the talent and all that stuff, but at the end of the year, having it be a tiebreaker, I think this first point that we even touched on here today is the best one. That they couldn't get past the 11-2 10-3 record with SMU and Clemson. Like they couldn't go, hey, do you think it might have been harder to play Georgia and then South Carolina? And then they won the head-to-head. And it was like, we said we weren't going to change it with the conference championship games, and they didn't.
Right. And I don't think, I'm not saying this becomes we pull up Nagy or some other representative in the room and hey, well, who has the most help? It's about providing perspective in that, okay, I got it, but they played LSU, which has, what did they wind up with? Four losses, 5 losses. They played LSU and there's carnage. There's a weekly toll it takes physically, mentally having to play. Like, yes, you can see the strength of schedule and all that, but let's also look at like the strength of schedule gets knocked down because LSU winds up with that many losses, but you're still playing teams with all these players and all this talent week in and week out. And so just providing that perspective may help in the third or fourth ranking or the second to last ranking. Maybe all of a sudden we see teams from the SEC where the schedule week in and week out is a lot more difficult and the gauntlet to get there is more difficult. Maybe we see them get the appropriate amount of credit for what they had to go through. That's my only point.
Right. But knowing that the committee is supposed to check a lot of boxes geographically and knowing how these conversations play out geographically, there's just no sympathy. I mean, we have people like I've worked with people where I was like, you actually think some of these other conferences are better when this league has twice as many players drafted. But when it comes to the committee and the seating, I do think there's a line of like that voice in the room is respected and people, but it's not going to be any kind of tiebreaker. Nobody's going to want to hear that. I mean, even hearing this part of it, like you're going to get ripped for being like, oh yeah, okay, we'll just put in all the draft prospect teams and whatever. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's where that conversation ends up going. As we look at the bracket here, who are you picking?
Oof, I didn't even thought about that. I'll tell you what, man. Texas.
Okay.
Texas. Because I think they get into a rhythm. They get that first game at home against a team in Clemson that doesn't belong. They get to play another team that is solid, but without Jordan Tyson, their wide receiver, I don't think Arizona State has enough balance offensively. Now all of a sudden they're in the semifinals, and yeah, that'll be a hard game. But any team in the semifinals is going to have a difficult game. But then it becomes one win to get in. And I'd rather, if I'm Texas, I'd rather play Oregon in the semis than have to play Georgia again. So I think that because Penn State, I don't think can beat Georgia. So while Penn State got the easiest trip to the semis, I think Texas has the best path to the national championship.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I picked Oregon this summer. I'm going to stay with the Ducks. I also want to remind.
I don't have a problem with it. I really don't, obviously.
And by the way, like talking about gaps, when we were like we did this on Saturday, like when I watch Iowa State, Arizona State, it's like, okay, like there's a difference here. When I watched Penn State against Oregon after watching the SEC title game, I didn't feel like there was this massive difference. But we're also
there was a difference, but I said on our show Saturday night, I have a greater level of appreciation for this Penn State team than I have had in the entire James Franklin era. And it's based not solely, but in large part due to how they hung with Oregon in that game. I thought that they showed a lot of different things in that game that I didn't always feel like was the case with a James Franklin. James Franklin teams play the way they play in massive games, top 5 matchups like they did against Ohio State. This was different against Oregon, I thought.
Best I felt about a Penn State team in years.
Yeah.
So totally agree. Before we say goodbye to McShay, just want to remind everybody, FanDuel is the only place that you can parlay college football teams to make the semis or the final. So you can future it out by taking a look at the bracket right now and seeing what you like. Again, FanDuel Sportsbook, the only game in town for that. Again, the McShay Show will be out tomorrow. They're doing a quarterback confidence draft, so make sure you subscribe and check out that podcast with McShay and Mensch. And we thank him for his time today, man. Fired up.
Love it. Appreciate you coming on Saturday night, and happy to be here. This is I'm excited. I mean, you're trying to like knock this whole thing. I'm excited. I'm like, how can you not be excited about what the next, what is it, 5-6 weeks has to offer in college football?
I'm totally excited. I can't wait. I was looking at the schedule. I go, this is how we're getting that Friday night game. It's going to be Austin. I can be excited and also critical. I can be, it's the same as the play-in game. Like there might be a 37-win team in the Eastern Conference in the NBA that's going to get one more chance to be in the playoffs. I think that's stupid. It doesn't mean when the play-in games are going on that I'm not home excited about it. It's the exact same principle. All right, Todd, we'll talk to you next week. Again, McShay Show, make sure you check that one out. We are going to take a quick break. We're going to bring in the star of the show, Kyle. We're going to do some life advice live here on our YouTube channel. Back in less than a minute.
Want details? Fine. I drive a Ferrari, 355 Cabriolet. What's up? I have a ridiculous house in the South Fork. I have every toy you can possibly imagine. And best of all, kids, I am liquid. So, now you know what's possible. Let me tell you what's required.
Okay, a little live advice for you. Life advice on YouTube. The email address is always lifeadvicerr@gmail.com. Fresh for you on a Monday morning here on the East Coast, afternoon on the West Coast, Monday morning deal. We got Kyle, we got Ceruti, Oregon dangling in the back here. We don't have his video up, which is fine. That was sort of predetermined. If we feel like we need to go to him for something, we will. How is everyone?
I'm good, man. It was an up and down weekend. We had the Franz injury news, which was a bummer, but then my guy Chalamet, just what an incredible Saturday for my guy. Game day.
Yeah, I mean he brought it. It was incredible, and guys were so like happy about him and how good he was, and he had the little mustache going. Because I just think every time there's somebody who clearly just memorizes one or two lines on College Game Day, the celebrity picker, like nobody really cares what they have to say, and then the guy would be like, I just think this Tennessee secondary has something to it. And then all the guys be like, whoa, look at this guy. Like he said Tennessee secondary. Chalamet sitting out there picking upsets like the Bob. I mean, it's just unbelievable the stuff he was pulling off, and the mustache in line with Bob Dylan. And then we find out that he's a huge Ringer guy, or he's actually a Grantland guy. So Simmons, Zach Lowe, he follows Woj. So still locked into the Bonnies. Our thoughts with Woj right now as well.
I almost texted Ceruti, but I was like, I'd probably be like the 100th guy that texted him. So I was like, I'll just let it breathe. I'll just lay out on this one.
Well, I didn't get a chance to watch it live because there was kid stuff on a Saturday. You know the deal. I was trying to get
You were
home
in
for
Denver
for the bigger games. Yeah, that's true. I was away for a couple days, and I come back and my extra Twitter whatever is I have 1,000 notifications. So I did watch it later. I mean, some say I'm growing out the mustache just to be like him. I cannot confirm or deny that, but it was good, man. And I like that he called his TV dad McConaughey. He picked Texas because of them, obviously the L, but it was good. It was like a big I feel like ratings boost for him. Not that he didn't really needed it, but like the dudes now are like, wait a second, Chalamet, ball knower.
Well, then the other thing that popped out is they found some picture of him when he was a teenager, and I'm talking like 13, 14, waiting outside of the Garden for Amari Stoudemire with a jersey, waiting for Amari to sign it. So, I mean, sure, we'd like to book him because of you, but if he follows Simmons, you're going to get Allison on that. That's a no-brainer. True. Promote the Bob Dylan movie. Is he singing? It sounds like he's singing in the trailer, too.
Yeah, I got to be honest, not a big Bob Dylan guy, but I'll probably see the movie just because of him. But to go back to the basketball stuff too, do you remember that video a couple years ago that came out where it was like he was dribbling the ball dangerously high, and it was like, man, is this guy actually like a non-athlete? But yeah, he's recovered from that. I think this is what a great weekend for him.
What would you be like if you met him? Is that the number one guy you'd want to meet more than any single other person walking the planet right now?
No, and this is going to be controversial. We've kind of talked about this, but I've met Gyllenhaal, and Gyllenhaal was awesome. Like, just
how are you though? That's what we want to know. How you?
I was
with
great.
Gyllenhaal.
We were
good.
So tight.
Okay.
I've told the story a million times.
Sorry then.
No, it's fine. But he came into Mike and Mike. It was his first hit. Yeah, and he was.
You've
just
already seen him though. You've already seen him. So
he is the guy. But he's my guy. But yeah, Chalamet would probably be too, because just the Interstellar stuff and.
Would you hold on a
Dune,
little too long?
Big Dune guy.
You hugged it out
like, with Gyllenhaal.
You're trying to get out of a Trump
handshake.
No,
if it was Chalamet, yeah.
I would be uncomfortable. Yeah, I'd be uncomfortable. If you were like Sydney Sweeney or Timothy Chalamet, who would you be more uncomfortable with? The answer is Timothy Chalamet. No doubt about it.
Nice.
Because you have no shot with her. We're Chalamet.
True.
You're like, he loves basketball. Like maybe this guy could be DN me. Like,
right? New York's not that far from Connecticut.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Go to a Knicks Magic game.
Like, is Anthony Black really this good, Ceruti? Yeah. Hey, man, tell me about the Dune 3 script. All right. So speaking of dudes interacting with guys, before we get to a couple questions here, the Kyle Shuffle High Team had a magnificent time at the live show in Denver. Ended up at the same bar as all of you post-show. Shout out to the Velvet Banjo.
Yeah.
I got a little toasty via the 5 p.m. happy hour. Said, "What's up to Kyle?" And he gave me the best good to see a pat on the back and kept it moving I've ever seen. Not rude, not engaging, just incredible work. Denver has a lot to learn from the Frolic Room, it appears. As a guy who wouldn't have wanted to shoot the shit with me, I was truly impressed. You guys are the best. Thanks for coming to Ryan's second choice city to live in. Wow.
Huh.
You remember that, Kyle?
Well, there was this during the show or after? Was this at the Banjo?
I think this is at the Velvet Banjo.
Oh, I thought I was
there.
I thought I was giving up time left and right. I was worried because at the show there was no spot for me to sit and watch the recorder. Like the audio guy was just like, "Hey, buddy, it's pretty tight over here." And I'm like, "You know what? I know what you're saying. I'll go find somewhere to be." So I was kind of by the bathrooms, just like with a timer on my phone, taking notes on the show. And one guy went to the bathroom and noticed me, and then he went back, and then like suspiciously, like 7 minutes later, all these dudes, they were serving beers, but they were just like, "Can we take photos?" And I'm like, "Dude, I feel like I'm gonna get in trouble somehow." So that's what I thought. Like I was like dodging dudes left and right. But I thought at the Banjo I was like talking to everybody, but maybe not.
There was one Banjo guy who I felt like just had an extended ticket to the show, and he just kind of sat there and watched us the whole time. And so that was becoming a little alarming, where you're like, is this guy, because I hadn't seen some of my friends, and a couple of those guys I hadn't seen in years. And then there's the other core guys that I usually see once or twice a year. But I was like, all right, fired up. Thanks for coming out. Do want to hang out with my buds now. All right, let's get to a couple of these. Okay, this is a good one for our married guys here. 41, no gym stats to speak of, but I once closed my move ring 4 days in a row.
I've been there.
N-B to the D. Some backstory. My wife and I separated earlier this year. We're now going through all the exciting aspects of blowing up your life that comes with getting divorced. We've been together 5 years and married for 3. There should be some sort of divorce menu. Like, I know that there's prenups, but there should be some deal where if you're about to get married and then we just pass legislation for like a divorce menu where you go like escalator clauses, if you make the all-star team or something. No, just like if you don't make it to here, then separate corners, whatever stuff is yours, and that's it. There's no money exchanging hands. 5 years in, maybe this, but no kid. And I know that, like, in theory, this is kind of how it works, but it should be just something that you pick from that you've agreed to. You have your divorce menu, and there's all these different options with clauses, and then wherever you land in the divorce, that's just what it is. And it's not a ton of lawyers. It doesn't get dragged out forever and all these meetings and mediations and paperwork, because all of them start with like, hey, we want to do it the right way. Not all of them, but a lot of them do start with we just want to be civil about it. I want to be fine. Like 9 months later, I'd be like, how's it going? And be like, oh my God, I'm going for everything now. You should see some of the stuff that's happening. So if it was just predetermined menu with no substitutions, might be more efficient.
I like it, dude. Would be a lot easier to have that, conversation if it was just like something that's done, other than like, I'm going to ask you the question. Do you think we should maybe do a prenup? Like, I like that. I like if it was just more. It was just more like
prenup needs new marketing. Divorce menu.
Terrible PR team for prenups. I mean,
well, there's also something that happens with just words and phrases where over time there's such a negative stigmatization to that it's just like no one hears prenup and goes, "Oh, that's fun. That should be a good time." I know
you guys really love each other.
Tell me more.
Yeah, the divorce lawyers listening right now are probably not loving it. Not a ton of sympathy. So, all right,
wait,
here we go.
I've always had this. Hold on, I've always had this idea too, though.
Love it.
Like a television show where the divorced couple, they just do a draft of all the stuff that they own, like a live draft.
Love that. Fucking love that.
It's like, I'm gonna grab the house, first overall pick. It's a big one, and then it's like maybe a snake draft situation. It's like, all right, cool, I'll grab the Volvo, and you just go down the line, you just draft all your stuff.
That first pick though is like so unfair. That first pick is gonna be the house every time.
Or, I mean, maybe like you don't have a ton of equity on it. You don't want the house, and it's kind of a burden to you.
Right. Have you seen the fucking furnace in that thing? I mean, good luck. Right?
Pools
they said
caved
this was going to be the new Scottsdale. Like, I'll take Doug. Like, the kid went third.
Yeah. The dog gets drafted before the kid.
Then there's a third kid who's like, I'm still on the board. I think the kid, I got to tell you, divorce draft just sold itself.
Genius, dude.
That's one of the best ideas I've ever heard. Do you imagine Kyle leaving the house when divorce draft is on?
Yeah.
No, dude. No, and it'd be right in my time slot too. It would definitely be in the 3 o'clock, 3:30, late lunch.
The best would be the TV analyst. He'd be like, I can't, this car is actually totally overvalued, but we know that he loves it. He's
accident in 2015. No one's even talking about it.
You got a big board on the side of all the stuff of like some analyst that ranks all their stuff.
This is unbelievable.
Awesome, man.
Should we turn this off right now and get to work?
Yeah. It's already out. Someone else. It's his live. We couldn't even cut that out.
That's right. The worst day ever to do it live. All right. So this guy's like, hey guys, remember me? I'm getting divorced. I wrote an email. All right. So though we essentially lived as roommates for the last year, it ended because I didn't treat her the way she deserved emotionally. And by the time I realized that the damage had been done, she couldn't forgive me, so she left. Sorry, dude. That reasoning is relevant because I recently started dating another woman. It's nothing serious at this point, but I do enjoy her company, and we seem to be a better match than my ex and I. However, she recently asked over text why my marriage ended. I told her it was a valid question, but one that would be tough to answer via text. We're set to hang out next weekend, and I'm not exactly sure how to proceed. Do I tell her the truth and risk scaring her away, or do I color a little outside the lines and be vague about the reasoning without actually lying? Thanks, love the pod. By the way, this email was before the weekend, so this likely already happened. Sorry we didn't get back to you sooner. A lot of emails. So we got spammed with all sorts of nonsense here. I'm not going to be specific, but we don't appreciate it. I'd be pretty liberal with the I just don't think you want to come right out, certainly over text. So that was the smart read of just being like, I was emotionally abusive. I don't think you want to say that phrase. I think you want to maybe build to that conclusion, which I think would show a sign of a side of you that you are mature, right? But I think just you're going to need some like mental appetizers for you to share that. I think it's cool that you're aware of it. You understood your mistake. And I think that there's a mature partner out there, maybe it's her, that would appreciate your evolution to coming to that point and not just sitting there and lighting up your ex. Because anybody that's ever dated in the divorce pool, a lot of the early stuff is how terrible the ex
No
is.
one wants to hear that story either.
Right.
Even though you're always like, well, that's interesting. But like, you know, once you get the broad strokes, you're like, yeah, I really don't need any more bullet points unless it's like something crazy, which it never is. It's just like, yeah, this sucked too. And that sucked too. Not fun to listen to.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, the trauma of going through it too, is such that person hasn't really even healed yet. And this is just part of their deal where they're going to share it the whole time. So I think what you need to do is you need to, obviously in person, which your instincts were right here. I think you need to like see if you get follow-ups. And if you're not getting a ton of direct follow-ups, don't follow up your own shit.
What else is going on? Right?
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you actually probably don't need to, in this spot, offer up a ton more, because the problem is, as any of us that have ever been out there in the game understand, like you start sharing more because you feel like you're being honest or whatever, it's just going to lead to even more stuff. So don't be ready to just dump the entire playbook out the next time you have to explain it. I think that's the safest way. And it's not, I don't think it's dishonest. I just think it's, if you're interested in this person too, like I just don't know what kind of guy can survive out there going out on dates very early on post-divorce being like, emotionally, I'm just pretty damaging.
Yeah. I'm a work in progress.
Yeah. Trying to get there. One day, I hope. You want to do this again next week?
Feel good vibes about you though. Yeah. Yeah. You can change me. Yeah. You can't go into this being like, you know, you have to take some of the blame. You have to show some humility. Like, because if you just say it's all the other person's fault, then they're not going to believe you, and that makes you look like a shitty person. You have to be real about it. But I would not go into any specific detail unless you really get to know her, and then you actually have to get through, you know, I'll start unpacking some of the stuff that you went through. But I don't. And then if she's too into it, like that's almost a red flag too. It'd be like, no, tell me more. And then you're like, why? Why are you so interested in this? So I would be vague, take some blame, and then hopefully just kind of keep it moving on to Cincinnati.
Yeah, this is your story, right? You're fucking Taylor Sheridan here. Like you can decide what goes on. Now, I'm not saying you should make up a bunch of stuff, but I mean, let's be honest. You've probably lied to her about something, and you probably will lie to her about something else. That's just what happens when you're in relationships, even if it's not a big lie or a little lie. I think you could totally just like zoom out and just be like, "We weren't ready. I certainly wasn't ready." And then I don't know who's going to argue with that. We're like, well, what specifically do you mean? I don't really think that's one of those questions that you're going to get if you just go vaguely like it wasn't a great match. It certainly I wasn't ready. I don't know. What else? How much dig into it? If you dig into that, you're like, really? What, you fucking weirdo? What do you mean? Didn't I just tell you? Mm-hmm. I think you could totally go vague, and you're not shitting on her. You're not shitting on yourself, because that's just kind of silly to do if you don't have to. So that's probably what I would have done.
I also think there's a way that you could get there where that's what you're saying you did without saying that phrase. And I'm not saying you're even going to do that, but like say she had a hobby or she wanted to start a small business. You could say,
wasn't very supportive.
Some things that we weren't aligned on. And like, here is an example. Like she was pursuing this. I didn't really understand it. Probably thought it was a bit of a waste of time. Looking back, I could have been more supported, even if I didn't love the likelihood of it being a success. And the lesson that I've learned is that you have to be there for your partner. You have to be supportive in times where you think that maybe they are making a mistake, even if they're actually pursuing the passion, because then pursuing the passion and being supportive of that is what marriage is about, not the, hey, this is a loss, don't do it. How about that? Hope people had a pen.
That was great from you. Yeah.
Yeah. Should I get a tattoo? All right. What's up?
Perfect.
27 years old, 6'2", 205, ex-FCS defensive lineman, down 50 pounds since my playing days, 290 bench, 385 back squat, NBA comp is Brooke Lopez. So this guy was 205 255, now 205. I'll get to it. I'm not really sure why, but a few months ago, I became really intrigued by the idea of getting a tattoo, not some small artsy tattoo, but potentially a half sleeve. The issue is that I'm not typical tattoo guy. I don't really know how to explain it, but I've never seemed like the guy who would get a tattoo. I'm about to graduate law school and start my career as attorney. I never had any interest in getting one during my playing days, even though a lot of the guys on the team had them. The idea started in my head kind of randomly as something I really want to do now. I figure I'll wait another month or two and see if the urge passes to make sure it's not a phase, assuming I still want to get one. Do you think I'd be making a mistake? I live in a pretty progressive area where a lot of people have them, so I'm not too worried about it affecting job prospects or anything. Any advice? What do the guys think about tattoos in general?
I think I flipped on tattoos. Like, honestly, if I see like a lawyer or a doctor with a tattoo, it's almost just like, that guy must be fucking awesome at his job. I don't know why. I don't know.
Yeah,
if
that's a good
I don't
point.
know if it correlates, but like before, like I used to think they were for like bikers and, you know, and it's just like you're just coloring outside the lines. All right, great. You're not clocking in anywhere anymore. So you've decided that's your path. And now if I see like a real professional with like a serious tattoo, just like, this guy must be awesome. So when he said, you know, when he said he was graduating from law school, I'm like, that actually lines up right with what I think is kind of cool. Yeah, but waiting on the urge is good. Like this was payday and this was happy hour. That's what it was. I don't have the urge for any more. Maybe it'll come one day, but as of right now, it's like I don't have the bug or whatever they said. Probably not the bug. Never mind. But I don't like, it's not in me and I need more. So I don't know. I think it's cool that you're a real professional, because in my mind, that stuff that just takes you to another level for me.
Sir,
I have three.
well, sounds like
Shocked,
America over
actually.
here.
I think I knew you had one, but I'm shocked you got three.
None of them are very visible. I have one on my wrist that is
That's the
23
one I
Roman
knew.
numerals. I was
Jordan?
born on November 23rd. 23 is my favorite number. No, you know, it's a funny story.
Okay, good.
I was born in 88, and growing
Jeez.
up, like my mom, my parents weren't really big sports fans, and my mom was like, "Why is 23 like everywhere? Like, this is awesome. Like, my son was born on the 23rd." Like, she didn't understand like the Michael Jordan craze. She just thought 23 was like some special number. So yeah, I had a lot of 23 random Bulls stuff that she didn't really know was actually, it's kind of a miracle I didn't end up a Bulls fan. But 23 is just a big number for me, and I kind of like the Roman numeral vibe. It's played out. Everybody has it. It's fine, but I think it looks cool, and I like it. I like it on this spot because it's like, you know, you can kind of see it, but also it's sort of hidden. And then I got two on the inside that were kind of like last minute deals that I did with my wife when we were on I think it was our second or third anniversary trip. Those were less thought out. I don't have enough ideas. That's the problem. I like tattoos. I think they look cool. I'm with you, Kyle. Like, I think people, when I see like a good one, or I see like somebody out, a professional who has one, I'm like, that person probably went through some shit and is good at their job and has tattoos. So they're probably double good at their job.
Right.
But I just don't have enough ideas. So if you have a good thing, like, think it through, and like if you have something kind of creative and that you want to do that is really meaningful to you, or if you just like a thing, like Kyle's got the OSP thing. He liked it. I actually think that tattoo's kind of awesome now. No, I know, but like it's I don't know, like it's kind of endearing. It's who you are, you know. Like I like that about you. That
Yeah,
that
it was
you
the
have
first time
something
I
like
felt
that.
useful in this, you know, job I kind of like stepped in shit into. So that was kind of why I did it. And
The
happy
sleeve
hour.
thing's kind of crazy
Hate it.
though, because you have to. It's like, you know, you need a lot of things. You need shading. It takes like multiple sessions. Like, that's a real big investment.
Yeah.
And it's a huge change for people that know you.
Yeah, I
So-
hope it's not a koi fish when it's all done and it's just like awesome, right?
Yeah.
I love Japanese culture.
Just sounded really exactly.
Hope to go one day. We've covered it, but I missed the tattoo window by a couple years. There were a handful of guys in our fraternity that went and got tattoos, and I can tell you now, none of them are showing them off, being like, "Hey, look how sweet this is." And I
Yeah.
remember when the guys got together, they were like, "Are you in?" And I was still kind of not in, but I probably would have, but I just didn't have the money on top of everything else. So like I had an easy out that I couldn't even come up with. Like, I was like, where are you doing them? And they were doing them in Vermont somewhere. And like one guy got this lion, and you know, the lion's supposed to be like fierce leader, king of the jungle. And came back, the lion looked like he was like a character in a Grateful Dead t-shirt. I mean, just out of his mind. However, the guy drew the lion, like just these googly eyes, like a big smile on his face. It was horrible.
It's like a
Dudes
stuffed
were
animal.
like, yeah, and you know, and you want to be fired up, you just get this ink put on your body for the rest of your life, and guys are like, "Oh, yeah, what's going on? Was that like a cartoon lion?" talking
Adult
Hanna-Barbera
Swim
here?
lion, right?
Like what's
I gotta be honest, the
what's up
line
with your
thing
lion?
too. The line thing too is, I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody listening that might have one. Like, good for you. Maybe yours looks good. It's kind of played out. Like all these soccer players have like
Yours
big
looks-
lions on their backs, and they've got the like. Even my guy Christian Pulisic, he's got the two eyes here. It might be a tiger situation, but he does like this. It's like, all right, cool.
He did that for a
I guess.
celebration. Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know.
I haven't
I had a
seen-
buddy. I had a
Go
buddy who
ahead.
had a cover up too. Like he got one on his arm when he was like 18, 19, and he basically put a sleeve over it to cover the whole thing up. I mean, the sleeve
Yeah.
is intense. It's better than what was there before, but it's intense.
Dude,
I-
a
look,
lot of
I'll-
the 18-year-old ones are just terrible. My buddy got this terrible Yankees one, and it like I don't know if this person was like experimenting
Terrible?
with.
That sounds cool.
Well, it was like I don't know if the person who did it was like experimenting. He was like, when I remember when he got it, he was like,
That's
"Yeah,
not what
dude,
you
she
wanna
does
hear."
it. She does it for free because she's like practicing or whatever." And it
Yeah.
almost looked like airbrush colors, like it's not real regular tattoo colors. And it's like it looks like those air pens that you used to see on like TV commercials. That's what it looks like still. So I think he's going to be doing something about that. But I haven't seen. Other than like old army guys, I really haven't seen like an ancient person with like silly tattoos. Like I've seen some like, dudes from the service.
well-
It's like this one means that, this one. I just haven't seen him in many walks of life. And I thought the big tattoo craze started long enough ago that you'd see some olds with some,
No,
with some
it's not
damage
that
on 'em.
old, but 20 years from now, there's gonna be people in nursing homes with like sleeves being
Yeah,
worn
and
around.
like the
Cool
like
chest pieces. Yeah,
the
yeah.
shitty, the bad looking tattoo that's an anchor and from the guy in the service. I think that's cool. I just wonder what
I
it's
love
gonna
that.
I
like.
agree.
I
think
just
I
it's a
think
love
great
the
tattoo.
old anchor. I
When
think you
it's
should bring
gonna-
the old anchors back.
Right, but when it's going to be like, I this was a fridge because whatever, just guys that have weird stuff now that like not even tough guys, just guys who are just inked up. I wonder what that's going to look like, and I can't wait to find out.
I
have
felt
a
like there was
buddy-
always go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I have a buddy who has like the burn the ships, in a cool kind of font on him. Like that's something subtle. That's pretty cool. Little
Like
Cortez,
dudes with
not-
Michael
although
Scott
Cortez
tattoos
not-
that love The Office and got him ironically. Like, what's that going to be 75?
Well, the bad ones I feel like
Prison
from
Mike
like
tattooed on your shoulder. I can't wait.
Ryan, the bad ones I feel like in your age bracket is more like the barbed wire thing, like the dudes
Oh,
that
yeah.
got the
Yeah.
barbed wire bicep.
I
or the
dreamed
lower
about
back.
barbed wire when I was young. I was
Yeah.
like, that looks awesome. Those 25-year-old guys with barbed wire. I dreamed about it. It's like my mom
I guess
would kill me.
scuttling the ships isn't as cool of a tattoo.
That's true.
As we cleared that up with the Cortez guy.
Yeah.
I felt like there was a lot of sleeve guys that shouldn't be sleeves. Like I've seen a couple like Twitch streamers that are gamers, and I'm just like, dude,
Just
you
not
don't
tough
have-
guys at all.
You're not remotely scary. And so that thing's been devalued. This guy played D line. I don't care that it was FCS. You're 205. Like I'll just tell you right now, Chris Long's full sleeve looks cool.
Right.
It also looks cool on Chris Long
Yeah, he's
because
exactly.
he looks like Thor, and he put the money into it. And he also made the point to me. He was like, if I was told if you do it, you make the tattoos bigger. You make them big so they look good. I think it was also because they look good on TV. And when he's sacking an NFL quarterback and he's flexing, like I don't know who among us wouldn't think that would look cool. 99.9% of us are not going to do it in this, but based on what the email said, I don't think it matters anymore. And I think you're right. Professionally, it doesn't really matter anymore. I don't know that there are any rules with it. I think the only pivot would be that it would start to be phased out. Like more and more people would be like, this thing is over and now I don't want to do it. So I think you're a clear go, but I love the idea of you waiting on this because you may be getting in on the downside of it all. Like, will we ever be in a spot? Like, I think some guys look really, really cool with it. I also think there's guys I look at, I go, you should not have a full sleeve. You don't deserve one. Like, what are your bench numbers? This guy's bench numbers pass it.
I think it's additive
Yeah.
though. When you reach a certain type of career, like if you were like a CPA, I don't know, not really sure. But if we're talking lawyer, doctor,
Full sleeve lawyer. Yeah. There was a guy I remember at my gym before anybody had the sleeve where he had these like tentacles just going past where his wrist would be on a shirt sleeve.
right?
So
Just
there was
poking out.
nothing on his hand, but it was like just poking out. And he was a 9 to 5, like white collar guy, whatever. I think he was kind of a badass though, too. But he had like the full sleeve before anybody. And I remember asking, I was like, do you have it like that specifically? He goes, yeah, it's just like a very little thing that you may see it just pass where the cuff of my dress shirt is. And he's like, I did it that way purposely. So it's sort of there, but it's not like all the way over the top of my hand. I was like, wow, you're the coolest. I would bet $500,000 that Wargon does not have a tattoo.
I think we could agree.
Wargon?
I have 2 tattoos.
Yes, I knew it. I was gonna say it. I knew it.
Oh man.
Keep them below my shirts. Yeah.
Wow, I owe you $500,000, I guess.
Wow. Damn.
Nobody took the bet.
Yeah, but I should have. I fucking knew it.
I know.
I knew
know.
it. Why would you assume? Huh?
Yeah,
he's probably
but see,
killed a guy too. Like honestly, like he's got so much history that we just are
what, though?
barely scratching the surface.
Wargon, would you ever get a full sleeve? Do you think you're a full sleeve guy?
No, definitely not.
I would bet $500,000 on that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, had a bad year this year. Betting,
Ever pierced your earbud?
No, never have.
He's a smart guy.
I don't know if I can pull that off.
Hidden tattoos, no ear piercings. What?
I will pay for an
On a
earring
heater.
today if you want to do it.
Hoop. Got to be a hoop.
Double fake diamond studs from
Been
a
there,
mall
dude.
kiosk.
Think on that. Yep.
Yeah. Little QZ. All right. That'll do it for our show today. Thanks for everybody for making the live broadcast happen. Thank you to Wargon. Thank you to Kyle and Ceruti on the show, the Ryen Russillo podcast. Please subscribe to that and check out our YouTube page as well that you are on, and subscribe. And we'll be back on Wednesday. So thanks for joining us on a live broadcast on a Monday.